Hello, everybody. We did our project on oil companies and their protesters. Our group consists of myself, Sarah Garcia, Emily Bowen, Brady Thompson, and Joshua Singer.
I'll be talking about oil production and why it has brought so many protesters to what they have been doing. So, the oil and gas industry has been the industry that environmental groups wanted to target for all these climate change issues that have been happening around the world, such as global warming. And these protesters really rally behind the fact that oil and gas companies directly contribute to the climate change that we're seeing today. The industry giants like ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips have known about the harmful practices that they have been doing for many years, yet still continue on with their drilling and sale of fossil fuels. And so these groups like Just Stop Oil have been going out, and you've seen them throwing food on paintings, blocking roadways, and spray painting to help get their name out there and help bring a light to this issue that we are seeing today. And unfortunately for these groups that have been protesting anti-oil, there's been very limited legal action taken by governments to help stop the drilling and the usage of fossil fuels that we see today. It's very limited in their capacity because it's just a very difficult thing to get away from as we have grown so dependent on it. So there's been some wins where you will see the farmers protest in France to lower the gas prices, but that really doesn't do anything to help contribute to stop the oil and gas production that these groups really are fighting against.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Bowen, and for my part of our group's project, I will be talking about the origins and evolution of climate change protesters and how the fossil fuel industry has sort of led to these protests to continue to happen. Um, as we all know, fossil fuels are a very large staple in energy production. They heat and light our homes. They're involved in, industrial production and transportation and pretty much every single sector in many developed and wealthy nations across the world. In the United States, particularly, they began widespread use of these fossil fuels in the mid 1800s during the Second Industrial Revolution, when people are starting to replace things like steam with, coal and oil and gas and that sort of thing. And overall, these fossil fuels have led to significant quality of life improvements for people, in nations who have had access to them and new technologies that rely on them. Um, we now live in a world where you can turn on a light switch and be able to see even, at nighttime, or, be able to have reliable access to heat, which is something that many people who don't live in countries with reliable fossil fuel access don't have access to. And that has prompted a lot of new technology that has happened in several wealthy nations across the world. Um, and, overall, just economic growth. Um, so even though these fuels and these energy sources have had some benefits, they have also caused really massive, widespread environmental and public health issues. For one, they're terrible for, your health, just breathing in the smog that is released by them. But we know that these emissions from these fuels are causing climate change. And even in the beginning and like in the early to mid 1800s, when these fuels were being sourced and really being used, people were still skeptical of damages of carbon dioxide and of oil and gas. And one really notable study that came out around the time, it was one of the first studies that was about carbon dioxide and, anthropogenic climate change, was by Foote. And they really looked into the effects of these fossil fuels, even though everyone touted them as a very good thing. Um, and so we have known that fossil fuel companies have known about the costs of their products since the 1970s. They have known that they cause significant health issues. They have known that they are the cause of climate change. And frankly, people have not been very happy about knowing that they have known about that since the 1970s. This has led to a very large rise in environmentalism as a response. In the very beginning, that sort of emerged as Earth Day and other early environmentalist movements. Though many of these were focused on other environmental issues, they eventually bled over to issues like fossil fuels. And currently, we have organizations like Riposte Alimentaire and Just Stop Oil, which are these large climate activist groups all around the world. Riposte Alimentaire is French, and Just Stop Oil is based mostly in the UK, but also has some bases in the United States. And they have both created these very radical protests that has emerged from continued use of fossil fuels. So these industries' continued use of these products have led people to be very fed up and very exhausted by the continued ignoring of the public health issues and climate issues. And so people have begun doing things like trying to stop traffic and throwing soup on the Mona Lisa. And though these actions may seem very, radical at first, it's important to note that they do what they're intending to do, which is to bring focus to the climate issue. So thank you very much. My other group members will talk more about this issue and how it has evolved.
Hey everybody, I'm Josh. In this part of our presentation, I'll be focusing on how today's environmental conflicts surrounding oil companies are deeply rooted in historical patterns of protest, resistance, and industrial evolution. While groups like Just Stop Oil may seem like recent developments, the reality is that public resistance to the oil and gas industry have existed for over a century. Early in the 20th century, we saw labor strikes in oil fields where workers demanded for safer conditions, better wages, and greater accountability from the oil companies. These movements were often local, but they reflected growing tension over how the oil was produced and who benefited from it. Fast forward to the 1960s and 70s, public concerns shifted more directly towards the environment. One major turning point was the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill, which was one of the worst environmental disasters in U.S. history at the time. The public outcry after that event helped spark the first Earth Day in 1970 and contributed to the founding of the Environmental Protection Agency. People began to see clearly how oil productions and pollutions were linked, and grassroots pressure started influencing natural policy. These earlier movements laid the foundation for the environmental activists we see today. Many of the tactics used by modern protest groups, like direct action, media engagement, and public disruption, are borrowed from these historical movements. The radical flank effect, which we discussed in class, helps explain how more extreme protest tactics, even if controversial, often push public awareness and make more moderate reforms seem reasonable by comparison. What's different today is the scale and urgency of the issue. Climate change, ocean acidification, and extreme weather events are global, long-term consequences of fossil fuel dependence. Unlike past movements that were often local and reactive, modern groups like Just Stop Oil are proactive and international. They are pushing for a complete transition away from oil and gas and framing the issue not just as environmental, but moral and economic as well. Another key connection to the past is how government and corporations have responded. Historically, oil companies have invested heavily in lobbying and public relations to protect their image and influence litigations. We still see that today. We're also seeing shifts. Some oil companies are beginning to invest in renewable energy, not out of pure goodwill, but because public pressure, market demand, and even policies incentives are forcing them to adapt. So while today's protests may look different, they're part of a long tradition of environmental resistance. Understanding that history helps us see today's movements not as something radical or new, but as the latest chapter in a long struggle to balance the industrial development of ecological responsibilities. Thank you for listening.
Positing ways forward. First and foremost, we want you to understand that there are a lot of nuances to this topic. It is very complex, and if it could be solved by 4 undergraduate students in 20 minutes, it probably already would have been. Despite this, we've compiled a few methods that have historically aided in a smooth energy transition. Number 1 is incentivizing community colleges and vocational schools to train workers in clean energy fields. As we've already discussed, one of the biggest issues with just stopping oil is the fact that we have so many workers here in the United States employed by the oil industry. If we just stop oil, we're taking away their jobs and potentially harming their economies as well as their state economies and maybe even the whole country's economy. So if we utilize community colleges and vocational schools to keep all these energy workers employed, then we are likely minimizing this risk. Number 2, promoting and supporting diverse alternative energy industries. Now, we could just go to each of our governments and say, please give us more funding for our new alternative energy industries. We could just do that. But with the way the federal government's looking now, with trying to cut down on funding and frankly being supportive to the oil industries, we propose that we should be going towards more private entities for promotion and support of these alternative energy industries. We should be looking towards individuals like entrepreneurs or big companies or even the oil industries themselves. And then lastly, we should be opting for specific state and local policies as opposed to far-reaching federal policies. As you probably already know, we have a federal, state, and local government for a reason, and that's because each area, each state, deals with their own specific issues, and if we try to over-regulate on a federal level, then the impact is going to be good in some places, but bad in others. So what we should be doing is trying to opt for the most broad federal policies as possible. And then to implement all these changes, obviously some kind of activism, some kind of getting the word out there has to be taking place. So what we've come to realize is that climate protests are very successful in their impacting the public opinion and with gaining media coverage. Additionally, individuals are more likely to act on a cause if they view it as a local issue. As you can see here, we have a few different resources for you to try to get your footing in on the climate activism front. First, we have climate-focused communities such as climateaction.tech, climaterealityproject.org, and this Reddit community forum for climate change. And I would implore you to try to look in your specific town, city, whatever, for your own local climate-focused community. This goes along with what I just said a second ago about trying to stay within the local issues, statewide issues, be more broad the bigger the government gets. Next, we have resources on tracking legislation. This is really important for you to stay up to date, for you to rally for the bills that you believe in and rally against the bills that you think will be harmful. This goes back to informing your climate-focused communities. If you really believe a bill is going to be harmful, get them to rally for or against, or if you think it's going to be harmful or good, get them to rally for or against it as well. Same thing with contacting your representatives. If you see a bill that is going to be harmful or good, let them know. And then lastly, we have the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy website, energy.gov. And with this website, you can check out any new up-and-coming energy industries, any new kinds of renewable energy that are being made. If you really think one seems strong and you want to support it, let your climate-focused community know and try to rally support for promotion or funding for it.